Offloading towards Charlie, 5-3 Lima, Q Alpha. So you guys, 5-6. Switch left, we got him. Pull close to the right side.
All right. Well, good morning. I thought there would be like a standing ovation after that video. If that don't light your fire, then your wood's wet. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of AUSA. Welcome to Warriors Corner. I think we have a really great panel here with some fantastic leaders from across the sort of breadth of our Army. Not all aviators, and I'm pretty excited about that. So my name's Clair Gill. I'm the branch chief, about 2 months into the job. Still kind of figuring it all out. But as I see the landscape, frankly, everything that you're seeing here this week, I think everybody here sort of appreciates that we are an Army that is in transition, transformation, change, right? We're looking at the world, the global landscape, and we're watching warfare, the very nature of warfare change. The speed of technology is absolutely meteoric. And I think Army Aviation, as a member of the Combined Arms team, has a very integral, critical role to that. So welcome to Warriors Corner. All right, a couple things I just wanted to talk about, some of our fundamental core competencies. I talked about being a critical member of the Combined Arms team. We talk about CSense, strike, move, and extending the battlefield. I think the Army Aviation does that for the Army in spades. I like to say we're not Army Aviation for Army Aviation, we're Army Aviation for the Army. So we do everything that the Army does, we just do it with very well-qualified, well-trained aviators. We do it with incredible equipment. We're going to talk today a little bit about the future long-range assault aircraft as part of one of the Army's signature modernization systems. If you were here yesterday morning and heard the Secretary talk about it, she's doubled down on it. She is absolutely committed to this system, and I think it's going to change fundamentally how we operate in terms of the way it extends the battlefield, the lethality that it'll bring, the depth. We're just in a great place there. And I was talking earlier this morning about, the Huey was a pretty amazing aircraft that came online in the 1960s, and it lasted about 40 years. We're at another inflection point. The Black Hawk's about 40 years old, and now we're talking about how do we leap forward again in that technology. So additionally, I just want to highlight a couple things. We're looking at, you're going to hear about launched effects later today, or later in the presentation. We're also looking at what's the right mix of manned and unmanned systems, as we just acknowledge the fact that we've got machines that are learning, we've got artificial intelligence, data analytics. We're incorporating all of that into the aviation branch. So I like to say this is not your uncle's Army Aviation. This is a very transformational branch right now, along with the rest of our Army. All right, with that, I'm extremely proud to be here with these panel members, none more than the gentleman sitting to my left. You're going to hear a bunch of folks that wear aviation wings here talk about Army Aviation, but I think, nothing speaks louder than having one of our most capable Army divisions speak to the criticality of how they fight, how they employ aviation, and what the future long-range assault aircraft might bring to the fight. So with that, General Sylvia.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Major General Brit Sylvia. I'm the commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault, the world's only air assault division. And I love watching that video. First time I've seen that, it did fire me up. Particularly because the soldiers that were inside that aircraft and that were getting off that aircraft were wearing 101st patches. I like to tell people that pilots go to Fort Novosel to learn how to fly, but they come to Fort Campbell because they want to learn how to fight. So it's great to be able to be part of this panel and talk a little bit about what we've been doing as the world's only air assault division for the last year plus. What we like to say is we're developing the the fourth evolution of vertical envelopment, the large-scale, long-range air assault. And because it takes a long time to say large-scale, long-range air assault, a lot of times, as all things Army, we came up with an acronym we called L2A2. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do with our L2A2. So over the course of last year, we've had an opportunity to do this 4 times in a live environment, and then we executed multiple times in simulation. And we've been learning a lot from that because we can't actually do the large-scale, long-range air assault today. What we can do is we can build the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures, build the doctrine, build the structures, understand the sustainment in order to be able to do that. Because what the large-scale, long-range air assault is our ability to deliver 1 brigade combat team in 1 period of darkness over 500 miles, arriving behind enemy lines and able to conduct sustained combat operations. And why I said we can't do that right now is because the platforms that we have organic to the 101st are not enough in order for us to be able to do that in 1 period of darkness. And so over the course of this last year, the 4 times that we've done this, I'll talk about the one that we've done most recently when we took our 2nd Brigade Combat Team and moved them down to JRTC. So we started at Fort Campbell and we moved that Brigade Combat Team down to Fort Johnson. That was 575 miles to move them from that one location to the other. But what it took us setting up 2 mission support sites and 6 forward arming and refueling points in order to be able to move that helicopter assault force. It also took us 3 periods of darkness, so it took us 3 nights in order to be able to move that entire brigade combat team with the assets that we have available to us. And staff in all of those mission support sites and those FARPs that we had along the way took almost 1,000 soldiers to set up all of that sustainment and the security associated with that. And so then when we did this in simulation, we gave ourselves what is the air assault cab. So the Army has recognized this need for us to be able to do large-scale, long-range air assault, and they are designing the air assault cab. And so that Combat Aviation Brigade is going to have 4 times the amount of heavy lift aircraft than what I have today. And we will replace all of those UH-60s. We will replace them with a future long-range assault aircraft. And when we ran that in simulation, we were able to execute that 1 brigade combat team move in 1 period of darkness. So we made our timeline. But the second thing, and probably more critical than that, was that we cut in half that sustainment and security that we needed. So we went down to 1 mission support site and only 3 forward arming and refueling points in order to be able to execute that. And I don't think I need to tell you what that does in terms of our survivability because of our speed and our lower signature when we can execute that. So as we are building over the course of the next few years, this Air Assault Combat Aviation Brigade, right now we are doing the things in order to be able to build the foundation so that all we have to do is just receive the aircraft and we'll be ready to execute. So again, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. It's just a real honor to be able to be up here and talk about this. Thanks.
All right, our PEO Aviation.
Okay, 2 hard acts to follow, so I'll definitely keep my remarks short, but definitely appreciate the chance to be here with you all this morning. Some things that have changed in Army aviation in our portfolio and some things that have not. I'll start there. I'm not going to get into all the details of the things that changed in the aviation portfolio in the past year, but what I will tell you are the things that have changed and the ways that we're doing business today are markedly different than potentially you've seen in the past. And Flora is a great example of that, but I'll start at a macro level. If you look at the business approaches we're using today across the acquisition portfolio that we've got, the actual acquisition authorities that we're using and the technical approaches that we're using, those are different than they were, say, 5-10 years ago. The business approaches are much more competitive. The acquisition approaches, we're actually able to use the new authorities that Congress has provided us. And the technical approaches are really rooted on the foundation of a modular open system approach. So with that being said, Flora is a great example of how we're executing today. I think if you go back several years, if you go back about 10 years into the S&T portfolio, there were a lot of great ideas on how we were going to design, develop, deliver, and support these new machines that we're going to be able to field as part of the Future Vertical Lift program. Flora was then the Joint Multi-Role Technology Demonstration Program, and a lot of those TTPs for modular open system approaches and really the new air vehicle design TTPs of digital engineering and model-based systems engineering. We got some sets and reps there. And then 5 years ago, as we transitioned it to a program of record, we really looked at new ways of doing business. And so the new ways of doing business with other transaction authority approaches, using middle tier acquisition approaches, and then rapid prototyping quickly to get a capability into a major capability acquisition, that had really accelerated. If you go back and look at the historical timelines for aviation acquisition, this is absolutely an accelerated approach, but it does not sacrifice the rigor in a major program acquisition, major capability acquisition, and so forth. Things like that technical approach, we're literally going a little slower up front to go faster later. And what does that mean? That means we've got model-based systems engineering, we've got standards and interfaces that are defined down to the individual component level. And at that level, what that'll enable us to do in the future is to bring on new capabilities faster. And that's going to be super critical for the future and for our warfighters in the future, is to bring on new survivability equipment, new lethality capabilities, new communications equipment. And we're setting that foundation today. And we had a good indicator of the success of the program back in June when the Army approved the Milestone B decision for Flora. Moving forward, we awarded the first option with Army Contracting Command with our partners at Bell, and then we've moved out and completed or nearly completed the preliminary design review, all the closure of those items with all the MOSA use cases and all the great work that the team's done to set the foundation to now start building the aircraft and getting them into flight test. Those are the next steps. They're coming up in the next couple years. We're looking forward to that, and we're looking forward to continuing the work with our partners in SOCOM that have come on board early, and our partners and allies that have come on board with project agreements that want to really be a part of the program in an early phase, so then they can understand how to get their resources aligned when we do start exporting this machine out in the 2030s. So really look forward to the discussion and the questions coming up, and I'll hand it over to my teammate.
So this is General Clint Murray. He's our Med Center of Excellence, CG. Go ahead, Clint.
Thanks. So clearly not the pilot up in the front of the room. I used to fly planes, so maybe I get a little partial credit. I'm here to really talk about the role of Flora in the casualty and patient movement. If you look at large-scale combat operations, multi-domain operations, if you look at the lessons learned in Ukraine and the lessons we're starting to learn in Indo-PACOM, I think Flora will sort of address three big issues for us. The first one is really being able to clear the battlefield of our casualties, which will enable our commanders to have freedom of movement. If you look at our current medevac platform, if they're going to move about 24 surgical patients after being taken care of at a Roll 2 or a forward resuscitative surgical attachment back to a hospital at Roll 3, it takes them about 4 turns, it takes them 1 refueling, and it takes them almost 5 hours. In the Flora design, that 24 patient movement still will take 4 cycles. Both can carry 6 litter, but there is no refueling, and you drop it from 5 hours to 3 hours. So when you talk about air superiority, windows of time of movement, it is truly a game changer. When you talk about our problem in Indo-PACOM, the places we're going to put forward resuscitative surgical assets in our field hospitals are going to be separated by incredibly long distances in comparison to what we've been doing. Flora will be enable us to do this island hopping safely and available without this huge logistical tail that we just talked about. And then I think the last thing that Flora will provide us is from a protection standpoint. If you look at the distance, we may be able to move the Flora back versus where we have to put the medevac birds now. It really allows that protection assets to appropriately maneuver and give us a lot of ability to take care of our casualties in a new and a different way. And then just to highlight how we're looking at this from sort of a PEO perspective, is we've developed sort of a fake cabin, almost a Connex, so we're going to travel across the U.S. and have Compo 1, active component, National Guard, and reserves look at where do you put the litters, where do you put the oxygen, where do you put the ventilators in this. So really an opportunity to fine-tune it for the casualty care we need in all sorts of environments. I look forward to questions. Thanks.
Okay, and then bat and cleanup for us is General Cain Baker's our Future Vertical Lift Cross-Functional Team Director.
Yeah, so as the requirements guy inside of AFC, really driving the Flora program, talk a little bit about what that means on the battlefield. So you heard General Gill talk about what he's doing as the branch chief, a division that's already leaning forward and building TTPs, how we're going to employ it. My battle buddy, David Phillips, driving the acquisition plan, and then most importantly, the critical care we're going to provide our soldiers on the battlefield. But I would tell you, Flora is not a standalone system that we're going to have to be able to extend reach for the commanders. It's going to have to operate in what we call the air-ground littoral, and to truly dominate there, we're going to have to synchronize our warfighting functions so we can extend reach, look at fires, both offensive and defensive and across domain. And that's going to require synchronization across the warfighting functions. So our movement maneuver, our intel with our payloads as we apply those to launched effects, how we look at protection on our manned and unmanned capabilities from survivability and really counter UAS. And then, of course, our sustainment. So if you peel that apart a little bit, so what does that look like? Those are true capabilities that we bring together to support in that lower tier of the air domain that we call the AGL, this 3-domain battle space. So you take Next-Gen C2. Next-Gen C2 at the ranges that you heard the 101st Division Commander talk about is essential to bring this capability forward. So what inside of there are we talking about? We look at, for example, Clint talks about patient transfer, extended range, picking up casualties, extending that golden hour. How do we have a network potentially push patient data back to that role too? So they're expecting that casualty to show up and they understand what's wrong with them. From a sustainment standpoint, David's team and underneath the requirements, we built the platforms where sustainers at the launch point actually has an understanding of the health of that aircraft before it lands. So we're no longer, crew chiefs running around going, hey, what's broke? They know it's before it gets there, and we're more predictive in that capability. Launched effects is another critical aspect of that network. You think of a long-range air assault, you think of a, go, no-go criteria with a cherry ice call. Commander now has the ability to have launched effects out on the extended battlefield that's providing that sensor back to the crew, back to fires, to enable to provide an effect on that enemy while it's en route. The other critical aspect is, how does command and control look? What AI, what type of machine learning do we bring together for the commander so they can visualize, understand, and make pretty fast decisions on the battlefield in order to affect that enemy? Other critical piece is the interoperable mission planning that's got to occur. This is probably the most important aspect of a mission. How do we understand what the network looks like? How do we understand the balance of our payloads to put on launched effects? That all happens in the pre-mission planning aspect that we got to drive. And then the other out portion of this, to be dominant in this air-ground littoral, is autonomy and collective behaviors. For me as the requirements guy, this is the secret sauce that allows us to have true air-to-ground integration with our HMI robotics and our systems forward of the flight to actually provide those sensors forward. How do we have payloads that allow us to operate on and off the net when we're at extended ranges? How do we know what type of payloads that we want that has an actual effect on the battlefield? And so this year out at Edge, we just concluded that. We had a very deep focus on autonomy and behaviors, and we saw a lot of good positive leaps that, General Gill talked about where technology is. And then finally, when you look at the density and mass of capabilities that we want forward, how do we balance that with manned and unmanned capabilities? Then more importantly, when it comes to the unmanned systems, are they can soldiers actually maintain them? Are they cost effective? All that goes into the equation of all this capability that we put into this space that we call air-ground littoral. And then lastly, there's a large training piece. Obviously, the 101st is already getting out of it, but how do you train this at scale at the individual and collective levels? How do you do this at home stations? These are all things that, inside the cross-functional team with my fellow peers on the CFTs that we're looking at right now. So when we do deliver this capability in 2030, we're ready to deploy it and actually go win and fight our nation's war. So, sir, I'll hand it back over to General Gill.
Yeah, thanks, Cain, and thanks, team. I talked about the geopolitical landscape. If you look what's happening in Eastern Europe, you look at some of the frictions in the South China Sea, look what's going on in Korea right now. This capability cannot come soon enough. So everybody on this team is working to move it faster, make sure it stays on schedule, right? Cost, schedule, performance. We got to be disciplined about that. And every time I talk to the chief, he wants to know what am I doing about moving everything left, right? We got to fight the Army we got right now, but we want this in the Army right now. So with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. You want to moderate questions?
So my name is Ted Machuba, flight school class 8142, so way back there. One thing that concerns me right now as I watch what's going on in Ukraine is the ability of the enemy to target FARPs forward. And so the Air Force and the Navy are working together on aerial refueling for all of their platforms, crewed and uncrewed. And I think that that is a way for us to be able to push aircraft forward if the Army would consider that for future aircraft, definitely, but then retrofit them to the same kinds of capabilities that you have inside of SOCOM. Is there any plan to do those kinds of things?
All right, so I'm gonna say I agree with you, Ted. Like we need to look at that. We don't have that programmed in right now. That comes at the Army's big, right? At scale, the Army's way bigger. We're not SOCOM. We're not the Air Force. At scale, everything is just much more expensive. So we got to think about modularity. Is that a capability we want to bring on or not? You bring a great point just in terms of tactical application of FARPs. So FARPs isn't only gas, right? So we go back to the FARPs to arm up. So there's a function of, how do you do that as well? But certainly as we think about what do the FARPs of the future look like, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but this is something I'm pretty passionate about. Like the FARP of 1990 isn't going to work anymore. So let General Sylvia talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, so with the training that we've been doing, as we are looking at the design of our mission support sites and our FARPs, we are looking at how do they operate in a semi-permissive or in a non-permissive environment. And so the design of these FARPs, they have to be dispersed, distributed, much smaller. And so in one of the exercises that we did, we distributed these FARPs and we didn't land like we traditionally do, where you take over an airfield and you park all your aircraft out there in the field. So now we are taking our aircraft, we are parking them in a very distributed manner, not on airfields. We're camouflaging the aircraft, camouflaging the FARPs out there. And then during one of our exercises, when we got done afterwards and we were talking with the opposing force commander, he said, "Hey, I had great success in finding and targeting your FARPs." And I said, "Yeah, how many did you get?" And he said, "I got 2. I said, "Did you know I had 9 out there?" And he said, "Obviously, I wasn't as good at targeting your FARPs as I thought I was." And so that's the point, is that we do have to think about how do we do these things differently. New capabilities certainly are great, but certainly I think our tactics and techniques are the things that are going to be most effective in the near term.
And I think every 92 Fox in your division and every other division out there, and every 978 needs to be ready to pump aviation grade fuel and have all the nozzles and adapters so that you can do that. So you don't just have one unit FARP an aircraft, right? It becomes a division mission.
Just to add from a design perspective and a requirements perspective, the structure for air refuel is being built into the Flora aircraft. So not every aircraft will come off the line with a full air refuel probe and the full plumbing, but the structure, the fuel system is being designed to accommodate that.
Thanks, Ted.
Hi, Matt Baynard, Defense Daily. I had a couple questions on Black Hawk as it relates to Flora, but first, what is the kind of where do you envision the fleet mix between Black Hawk and Flora? And is the goal eventually a one-to-one replacement? And then the work that's being done on autonomy as it relates to Black Hawk, how is that being leveraged into the Flora program? Thank you.
There we go. Okay, I'm gonna let him talk to the autonomy piece. So the mix, right? The mix always comes down to kind of the situation that you're in. Would I love to put a Flora in everywhere that there's a Black Hawk? Sure. Do I think it's affordable? Probably not. So I mentioned, the Black Hawk's coming up on 40 years old, I believe. Am I doing the math right? 40 years since they first flew it, I believe. And, my sense is the Black Hawk's going to compete with the B-52 and the C-130 for going the distance, right? So we're going to have Black Hawks in our formation as long as any of us are reading the news. I think Flora is going to come on, and we're going to learn a lot about it. We're going to scale it. We're going to see where we are in the 2030s. And we're going to, once we go to full rate production and we get, we'll get that first limited test unit out and learn a lot about it. We got to figure out how we train it, and we start proliferating it. And if it is that game-changing technology and everybody says we got to double down, then maybe we buy more. But I think initially it's going to be some sort of a mix, and I don't see the Black Hawk going away anytime soon. Cain?
Hey, Matt, good question. So first of all, when we looked at the requirements for Flora, we had first in mind was autonomy. We knew that in order to deliver a capability to the battlefield where we could offload cognitive abilities or cognitive requirements in the cockpit and eventually reach into a full autonomous aircraft, it drove our requirements for Flora itself, fly-by-wire system that allows us to do that, onboard compute power, the ability to actually upload autonomy, and then with the MOSA architecture, it allows us to do that. We've learned a lot inside of DevCom over the last couple of years. We demonstrated out at PCC on specific platforms, not tied to those specific platforms, but more the behaviors and the algorithms required to when we get to the point with Flora to deliver that. Continue to look that even further with the Flora program as we look at requirement updates. To have full autonomy, you need to have sensors on that aircraft that allow you to operate, against the terrain, against the enemy. So that's another turn of iteration of requirements that we're looking at to onboard that capability. So thanks, Matt.
Okay, great. Hey, good morning. Scott Porter from Talus. This is going to be a top-level question, but appreciate some insight. So as we get into the point we can start planning maybe new capabilities for increment 2. General Baker, sir, you'd mentioned AI. So my question is, other than maintenance, and logistics predictability types of things, do you have any top-level guidance what you'd want us to focus on AI, in terms of capability? And do you think we're always going to have a man in the loop? Are we ever going to trust AI to make that decision?
That's a very top-level question and filled with tons and tons of answers. So, in my opening comments, I talked about the role of autonomy and what it brings forward. And so, sustainment is obviously a piece. And, maybe General Sylvia will back me up here. So one area that, we look at is fires, right? The amount of time it takes us to clear fires right now on the battlefield, ranges from minutes to multiple minutes. We're at the point with AI that we should be able to know where a flight is, where it's at, in relation to a gun target line, and understand that immediately we can clear fires. So there's one piece that, it's more than just airspace management. It's actually tied to, the warfighting functions that I talked about. The other pieces that, we look at AI is the amount of sensors that are going to be on the battlefield. How do we bring that data into a flight, into a Flora flight? How do we bring that back into an operation cell? And we optimize it for the commander to understand what the battlefield is telling them. If you go into a talk today, you typically have an intel analyst looking at a TV trying to determine, hey, what am I looking at? Right? Hours and hours. Well, first, we've got aided target recognition capability that shortens that kill chain, maybe give the commander an understanding of, hey, you're looking at your most likely course of action, your most dangerous course of action. Here's now where you need to reposition your assets on the battlefield. So all of that through that machine learning and AI is really to give the commander a better understanding of how to employ their forces and then really, apply it against what they've templated so they can, actually, accomplish the mission. That help you? Yeah, thanks.
Let me just speak to, he talked about this idea of cognitive offloading, right? So we know that flying aircraft is pretty intensive. We know that some of our aircraft are very intensive, right? When you're operating multiple machines and in some cases managing your aircraft and managing other aircraft, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we how do we deal with that cognitive offloading with potentially optimally or optionally manned aircraft? And so to your point, Scott, about manned versus unmanned, I think there's a continuum that's going to exist where we're going to have some things that are always manned and some things that will be just purely unmanned. And then there are some things in the middle there where we probably do need to do a little bit of an assessment. Commanders need to decide, where do I need my people and where do I want to offload that to machines? So, the one question I always ask is, would any of you go home on an airplane that didn't have a human up front, right? When we get to that day, then we can talk about going unmanned all the way. But my sense is, everybody's still, for all the reasons that are unnatural, because human or machines are very precise. They can be programmed to make all the decisions we can, but we still want that human up there. And, as we live through that, I think that's when we start talking about shifting to more and more unmanned. But my sense is as long as we have soldiers in the back, we're going to have pilots up front. And they might not be doing most of the flying, right? I mean, the airplane you go home on is going to have a human on the controls for about the first 2 minutes and probably a human on the controls the last 2 minutes. The rest of the time, you're being flown by the machine and just somebody looking at it.
Hi, Dan Shear from Inside Defense. Can you all talk about the recent visit that you all had to the 25th CAB? I know that soldiers had given some feedback on the a mock-up of the cabin, and how will that feedback be incorporated into the design? Do any changes need to be made, and what's the current date for the critical design review?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. So we had a great event out there at the 25th and it was a culminating event of multiple design iterations of the cabin. Let me take it one notch above that, though, to start with. Probably for the past 5 to 10 years, we've had a lot of soldiers involved in all of the touch points along the way. And get that design feedback from soldiers that are carrying their rucksacks in and having to sit in the seats for a long period of time. The folks in the front, the crews, giving feedback to the actual cockpit design. Those are super critical events. And those events have been informative not just to the requirements, but to the system specs. And then most recently out at the 25th, we were talking about actual cockpit and cabin configuration of the seats in the aircraft. So with full kit, with full sets of mission equipment in the back of the aircraft, we wanted to make sure that everyone could fit, and not only fit out into the aircraft, but get out of the aircraft safely. Out of the aircraft safely is important. And then to your point about how does this feed into the design reviews, as we just finished the preliminary design review, we still have the opportunity to build it in for the critical design review, which we're shooting for next summer. So really that'll be the culminating event before we start really building out the drawings, the design packages to be able to build those first prototype aircraft. So it's an iterative event. And then I'll add one additional piece that we learned. It was super informative for us to have the opportunity for Army pilots to fly the demonstrators back before we put the demonstrators away and we down selected to Bell. We had a lot of great information coming from there, and it informed things like power margin and things like, flight control configurations and those kind of things. So a lot of great inputs from soldiers all throughout the process. We don't see that stopping going forward. We see soldiers being involved all through the build process, so they'll be familiar with the build. They'll be familiar with how to maintain the aircraft. And then when we get it out to the limited user test, it'll be the culminating event there before we go to low rate initial production.
Okay, I think that's it. We got time for one more? One more.
Hi, Peter Felsted from European Security and Defence magazine. Over the last couple of days, I've heard an awful lot about launched effects, both from Black Hawk and also Flora. And it kind of seemed to me that maybe you didn't really need the Flora platform, given what you have in terms of future capability and launch effects. Are you confident that you can close that gap and you have everything you need with the platforms you have now, and you're never really going to miss that particular platform?
Peter, with the loaded question to close us out, trying to get me in hot water here. The FARA was more than just a helicopter, right? So, we have helicopters. What the FARA was bringing was, what it did in the ecosystem and its role in terms of managing data. And all. So I think that's probably for General Baker. Would we have liked to have had FARA? Sure. Did the Army senior leaders look at it and say, given the current environment of the world, the geopolitical situation, what we're seeing with technology and unmanned systems, and the fiscal sort of constraints that we have, they made a tough call, right? And we're going to make other tough calls. Like just because we start a program doesn't mean we're going to finish it. Sometimes we're going to cut it because it's not performing. Sometimes we're going to cut it because of a range of other factors. Would we have loved to seen that in the fleet? Sure. That's water under the bridge. We're not looking backwards. Now we're trying to figure out how do we fight the capabilities that it would bring with the things that we have and the things that we're going to bring online. So, Cain, you want to talk about the ecosystem?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier, the system of systems approach, this ecosystem that we're going to operate at extended ranges. FARA had a portion of that as it delivered launched effects to the battlefield and really is kind of a hub of that data path that would go back down to the commander. And so these are things that we're looking at inside of our S&T and then our experimentation. Launched effects, we are learning a ton in that advancement as we've got special user demonstrations coming up this year. We'll see how that works at extended ranges. We just saw it out at Edge. But, as we bring on Next Gen C2, that helps us, get after the range issues with the network to pass that data back. The other aspects that we look through is, what's the right mix of ground launched effects versus air launched effects? In that discussion, I talked about density and mass. These are all things that we're looking through. But, as we bring Flora on and, a lot of the requirements we already put into Flora, could it be a launched effect delivery system? Yeah, just like any other platform can. But, as we work with the branch chief and we make these decisions, I think we're in a very good position as an Army and as we provide support to the joint forces to still deliver that mission that FARA was going to do. Okay, thanks, Peter.
All right, team. I think I got the stop sign back there. Okay. Hey, I very much appreciate the panelists here. A lot of my friends and colleagues who have been doing great things for our Army. Speaking on behalf of Army Aviation to General Sylvia and General Murray, thank you. And the rest of my six-pack teammates here and other ones that are out in the crowd. I very much appreciate the fact that you all came and listened to this. I think Army Aviation's in a great place. Like I said, it's not about us. It's about what we do for the Army team and everything else that you're seeing out here. I just think we can be a huge difference maker in the third dimension using the skills and training that we have and some of the kit that we're bringing online. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Above the best.